Good afternoon, everybody, and this is Berklisle Sports Talk here. And today we are going to get to the NL West and the AL West. And by the way, we are just 3 days away from opening day. Opening day is this Thursday, July 23rd. Today is July 20th, and 2 days NBA scrimmages will start as well. And let's get to it. Okay, so in terms of the West, I'm picking the Dodgers to win the West. I looked at all the teams in the West, and no other team really, I don't think, has a shot to beat the Dodgers. If it's anybody, it could be the D-backs. They played right with the Dodgers. I might have even thought they were going to win the West in 2018, right around September 1st. They cannot pull it off. And just the type of team the D-backs are, which I'll go into more detail on them later on in this video. But let's get right to the Dodgers. Okay, so the Dodgers won 106 games last year, and they lost the World Series in 2017, 2018. Last year, I thought for sure they were going to win 3 straight pennants. They looked to be the favorites. They're by far the best team in the National League last year. And then it was Game 5, which as a Nationals fan, that was great to watch. But in Game 5, they had a 3-0 lead, and then really Kershaw gave up those back-to-back home runs to Anthony Rendon and Juan Soto. Then Howie Kendrick hit the grand slam in extra innings, the 10th inning, and then that was it, really, for the Dodgers season. So it ended prematurely, ended way early than they could have ever thought. And now it's about trying to get back to the World Series. And this is a 60-game season, so there's no guarantee that the Dodgers are going to win 45 games. Maybe it takes a while for them to get off to a slow start, like I said. And this team plays a week of baseball. That's a tenth of your season right there. And they have 60 games to get into the playoffs. And it's possible if the D-backs happen to play better than they do, and the Dodgers have to settle for a wild card, then they have to settle for a wild card. I remember 2018 coming off a 100-win season and a World Series appearance. So it really took them a long time to get it going. They really, truly did not get it going until September. I mean, there was doubts of whether they make it to the playoffs, even in mid-September of 2018, and they were able to get in. In fact, the Rockies took them toe-to-toe in the National League West all the way until the last day of the season, and it took a tiebreaker game to beat somebody like the Rockies, and here we are going into 2020, and this team, by the way, has added Mookie Betts. We'll get more into that towards the end, but right now you have Clayton Kershaw, Walker Buehler. That is the top of your rotation. That's probably about as good as any 1-2 punch. Or not as good. Kershaw is not quite the same anymore, and Buehler has not quite established himself. But that can be about as good as any 1-2 punch is what you want in baseball right now. And then outside of that, having Julio Urias. By the way, I just want to mention right now, this is a team that has lost David Price, who has opted out, and also Hyun-Jin Ryu, who was a Cy Young finalist last year. I think came in second in Cy Young voting. Decided is left to sign with the Blue Jays. So you have Urias, Ross Stripling, and here's an interesting thing I've heard them talk about. This could happen on July 28th. Walker Buehler and Dustin May piggyback in the first start. Since what I've heard with Buehler, reading about it, it's not quite into game shape yet. It's not quite into the, it's not at strength to get into full starts you're talking about. I mean, you see these final ramp-up starts where pitchers try to go 5 innings and throw somewhere around 100 pitches, whichever one comes first. Buehler apparently is not ready to do that, so if you talk about piggybacking, maybe that means Buehler goes 4 or 5 innings, and then Dustin May gets the rest. Or maybe he gets 3 innings, and then maybe you give the ball to Kenley Jansen, something like that. But we don't know, but apparently Buehler's not in shape. But when he does get into shape, maybe it's by early August, he's in shape, maybe it takes a few starts. So Kershaw, Buehler, it's great there, so we'll just say they're in the playoffs right now. Having Kershaw and Buehler, then all of a sudden, is it Alex Wood? Is it Ross Stripling? Does Dustin May really emerge this year? This could be a big year for him. Since while, yes, this rotation has always had a lot of depth, it's maybe not quite as good as it's been. Obviously, last year it couldn't have been much better with Ryu, Buehler, and Kershaw as your 1, 2, 3. And by the way, gone is Rich Hill as well, who's been with the team the last 4 Octobers, 3 full seasons with the team. So yes, this is somewhat of a different team, certainly rotation wise. Bullpen's always usually been near the top of the league. They've always had a good bullpen. Well, they're not quite as extreme as they once were. In some years they were bullpen first. It's clear they needed their bullpen, and the bullpen obviously kind of let them down, playing a close game 4 against the Nationals. Took them out of the game, and then obviously when you had Kershaw, who was technically a starter, but gave up those back-to-back home runs, and then Joe Kelly with the grand slam, the bullpen let them down. Ultimately, it's what ended up costing them the series against the Nationals. But Kenley Jansen coming off COVID-19, and also he's at extra risk. Has had heart issues in the past. I think it will take him a while to get going. So whether that means he's dominant, whether it means he blows a few saves, is not ready to go, or something like that. And again, this team that's great, you blow a few saves early on, and then maybe teams take advantage of that. All of a sudden, maybe again like those kind of slow starts, like what if the Dodgers start out 2-6 or whatever, or they're 8-8 for that matter, like they were last year. And no big deal. 2-3 weeks in, before you know it, they take off and they're running away with the West. Well, that may not be the case this year. What if the D-backs are 13-3 or something? That all of a sudden you're 5 games behind the D-backs, and you've played a fourth of your season, and now you have to play catch up pretty much right away. And another interesting signing, you signed Blake Trinian, who his ERA went up by almost 4 runs, had a 0.80 ERA, were just completely dominant. Had one of the best seasons of a reliever in MLB history. It was just 2 years ago, and now had a down year for the A's, is now signed. Could be the setup man. This was part of the Mookie Betts trade, since the 3 deal with the Twins and Boston. You have Grusdar, Gratterell, 21 years old, played in the playoff, pitched in the playoffs with the Twins, had a small sample size. I bet could start a few games, could potentially be part of that, could potentially maybe be involved in the piggyback scheme. Let's say it's Kershaw, Buehler all ready to go, and then maybe you join in with Stripling, or maybe you're part of a 6-man rotation, or something like that. And then you have Josiah Gray, who may come out of the bullpen. I think will be a future starter. Got as high as AA last year. Is 22, just turned 22. Will they impact the bullpen, or maybe they even start a few games? So we will see. The Dodgers seem like they have a lot to work with in terms of pitching wise. Then you go through their lineup, and you have Gavin Lux, who this will be his first kind of full year, 60 games. Next year will be his first 162 game season, where kind of came in, stepped up, hit a couple home runs in the playoffs last year. Obviously, you're bringing back Cody Bellinger. It's kind of interesting. I was hearing announcers talk about this with Cody Bellinger's. Apparently, he's doing some changes to his swing. Since obviously won the MVP, was dominant in the first half, but he did tail off kind of in the second half. Sure, he deserved the MVP after hitting 47 home runs and 115 RBIs, but there was kind of a drop-off in the second half. Apparently, he's making changes, whether that's going back to what he did in the first half or whatever, but apparently Bellinger's not satisfied with last year. Thought it could have been better. Thought should have been playing great baseball the whole season, since he did it at 420 in the first month of the year or whatever. But no one's obviously going to sustain 400. Corey Seager is his second season back from Tommy John surgery. Maybe now has an opportunity to really fully establish. And by the way, came in the league late in 2015, so that means next year is his last full year before free agency to try to prove something. So right now, next year could be a big contract year for Seager. So do the Dodgers start to think about potentially signing Corey Seager to an extension or not? Max Muncy is at 70 home runs in the last 2 seasons. Really kind of, again, we talk about what the Dodgers do. That happened with Justin Turner, happened kind of with Chris Taylor. Now Max Muncy, somebody who comes out of nowhere, who just, whatever other organization he was in, the organization didn't know what to do with him. The Dodgers apparently unlocked something that all the other organizations didn't know about. Same thing with Max Muncy. Jock Peterson was almost traded away to the Angels. hit 36 home runs, was almost exclusively against right-handed pitching, and right-handed pitching is more common left-handed pitching. So you have Jock Peterson kind of as a platoon option, maybe he's against lefties, maybe Pollock against righties or something like that, or Chris Taylor, and of course Mookie Betts is there, who can pretty much do it all. Has won 4 Gold Gloves, one of the best defensive players in all of baseball. Potential 30-30 threat, can hit well over 300, can win a batting title, can hit home runs. Mookie Betts is one of the very best players in baseball, won the 2018 AL MVP. So you have the 2018 AL MVP, 2019 NL MVP. And your lineup, obviously, they don't have a chance to put on a full encore of what we would have saw in 162. But if you have 2 MVPs in your lineup in addition to already having Justin Turner, Max Muncy, Gavin Lux, the Dodgers have always seemed to hit on high-end prospects. I don't think Lux will be any different. I think we'll have a good career there with the Dodgers. Obviously, lineup they can hit home runs. They draw a lot of walks. The bullpen should be good. Rotation will be good. The Dodgers in 60 games. Well, it's hard to judge since maybe these 60 games aren't their best 60 games. But if they win somewhere around 40 games, I think 40 is going to be somewhere around the total. Maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. They will win the West. And I haven't decided. I will decide that maybe tomorrow on officially World Series picks. But this is this year's Dodgers team. I really like them. That is who's going to win the West. So second best team, Arizona Diamondbacks. They were a very interesting team last year, and for multiple reasons. Since last year, they won 85 games. I mean, they were in the wild card hunt basically all the way until the end. And they lost Patrick Corbin, lost him to the Nationals. They traded away Paul Goldschmidt to the Cardinals. And then they traded Zach Greinke at the deadline since they did not think they were a playoff team last year. Instead, they got hot and came somewhat close to making it to the playoffs. And this was a team that in 2018 was building off that 2017 when they were a wild card team. They won 93 games in 2017. In 2018, they're trying to build on that. And it appeared they would. They looked like they might win the West. Certainly even make it to the playoffs as a wild card. They fell down the stretch. Gone was Corbin, as we just mentioned. Imagine if you had Corbin, Goldschmidt, and Greinke last year, all year, but then again, things were different. And that's what they did. They basically, you thought they're going to rebuild. I thought maybe it'll be a while before they win again. I certainly didn't think they would win in 2019. They have done that. And as I get into more detail, they have made moves to get better. For an example, they have brought in Madison Bumgarner, who, if you want to talk about a reliable workhorse ace, was finally healthy last year for the first time in 2 years. Did not suffer any freak injuries. So you have someone who you can start 30, 35 games. If this team makes it to the playoffs, we know can win a playoff game. The last time he pitched in a playoff game, second to last time, threw a complete game against the Mets in the wild card game. Obviously, talking about 2014. Well, granted, that was a number of years ago. If they're in the playoffs, you have that postseason ace. And not only that, you have Robbie Ray, who, interesting about Robbie Ray, reading his numbers, had 200 plus strikeouts in 3 out of the last 4 seasons, including had a career high 235 last year. But you'd like to see in lower ERA. 434 last year is 292 in 2017. So if Ray can put it together, maybe he can have a career year. It could be a sneaky. In this short season, you never know who can win the Cy Young. It could be anybody, really. And then you have Luke Weaver, who was in a small sample size, 12 start sample size, had over a strikeout per inning. And then here's an interesting 4-starter, Zach Gallen, who actually started out with the Marlins last year, was involved in a trade right around the trade deadline, is kind of retooling. Had an ERA below 3 in 80 innings, and 10.80 strikeouts per 9 innings, just turned 25. Or maybe it's about to be 25, but either way, you can have 4 good starters. So if you had to say on terms of reliability, Bumgarner is going to be good for them. You think Ray might be good for them. Luke Weaver, I don't know. Zach Gallen, encouraging early start to his career and given his age, you feel like he could be good. So you could have 4 potentially good starters for you. And then here's another interesting thing. You had Christian Walker at 29 home runs. Took him a long time to get going. You know, he's kind of spent a long time in the minor leaguer, mid to late 20s was also a Gold Glove final. So in some ways, was able to replace Goldschmidt. That's about as good as you could get there. Ketel Marte hit 29, 32 home runs, 92 RBIs. I mean, he hit 30 home runs out of nowhere, and for a long time, really didn't have power. Was kind of a single-digit home run hitter for a while. Then maybe started to get double digits, I think at 12 in 2018, and just took off, hit 32 out of nowhere. Now, does this continue? Does he always hit 30 home runs? Or is he maybe more of a 20, 25 home run hitter? But either way, I like the game of Ketel Marte. Eduardo Escobar, 35 home runs, 118 RBIs, kind of picked up where he left off. Former Twin was acquired in the 2018 deadline. And a player I want to see bounce back, David Peralta, played less than 100 games last year, 2018, almost 330 home runs. If you can get Peralta back. And here's another interesting move they made. They made 2 more moves. You brought in Starlin Marte, who had a career-high 23 home runs last year. And then you drove in a career-high 83 runs, has stolen 55 bases and 43 home runs over the last 2 seasons. Was playing with the rebuilding Pirates team. That was a smart move. And has stolen over 30 bases multiple times, at times even 40. And Marte, you know, he's been on some really good Pirates teams. Seems like he can hit for power, has played gold glove defense, can steal bases, can hit for average. He's hit around or even over 300 at times. Marte is a really nice addition to that team. Looks like he will play center field. And then you brought in Cole Calhoun, who hit 33 home runs with the Angels last season. So now all of a sudden you have power. You have multiple 30 home run hitters. Almost had a 4th if you want to include Christian Walker. Not to mention David Peralta. So this could be a really good team. This really could be a good team. I think bullpen is somewhat of a question mark. Certainly wasn't great last year by any means. So again, this could be a good team. I think they will compete in the West. I think they'll be close to the Dodgers. Definitely a team that I would consider for a wild card and could be potentially dark horse October team. Now, are they as good as what they could be in 2017 or 18? They've had a winning record 3 years in a row. It seems like they're kind of in 2017 or even 2018 mode where they're ready to win now. They're in position to win. They could win. Maybe the Dodgers catch a bad break and end up missing the playoffs this year. You know, remember the Rockies in 2018? They took the Dodgers toe-to-toe. They were not as talented as the Dodgers on paper. We're certainly going into the season. Well, if they can do this, and maybe it goes down all the way to the last day, who knows? Or even in 2018, Dodgers and D-backs D-backs and Rockies, when they had those 3 teams all make it to the playoffs, they ended up being right there with the Dodgers for a while before the Dodgers got hot and were one of the best teams in MLB history, and they won 104 games. So we don't know. But I don't think I have not picked them in the division. I just don't think they can. The Dodgers have the track record. They have done it before. They have been in the World Series in 2 out of the last 3 years. They have won 100 games 2 out of the last 3 years. By the way, they won 7 National League Western titles. I don't see any way why it wouldn't be 8. It will be 8, but the D-backs I'll have to strongly consider for a wild card spot. They may be a hard team to leave out. Okay. So next is the Padres. They've not made it to the playoffs since 2006. They really haven't had a real shot at the playoffs since 2010. This is year 2 of 10 with Manny Machado in the organization. So this Padres team could be set up for good long-term success. Whether they break out this year and make a run at the wild card, I think that's the next step, being in playoff contention. That is their next step, getting close to the playoffs in maybe 2021 or even 2022. That is the year they really, truly make it to the playoffs, especially if they expand the playoffs. I can't emphasize that enough. There's been a lot of talk about that. That was a lot during CBA talks this offseason, or during whether to have a season or not, and ultimately to not work out expanded playoffs for this year or next year. But it was in talk for potentially after the CBA expires. I just want to see more teams, more players in the playoffs. Get rid of tanking. So that way, if you can win 80, 85 games, you're good enough to make it to the playoffs, and perhaps maybe you can get better from there instead of trying to tear down and win, say, 58 or 68 games, and try to do what the Marlins did, or what you go on Tigers, Royals, Astros, Cubs, whatever. So this is year 2 of 10. They're starting to take a step forward. The rotation, Chris Paddock, definitely was a Rookie of the Year candidate last year. Dinelson Lamet coming back from Tommy John surgery. Garrett Richards also coming back from Tommy John surgery. Hasn't pitched since 2018. Zach Davies was a reliable starter in Milwaukee, mid-3s ERA in 30 game starts last year. ERA below 4 in 3 out of the last 4 seasons. Joey Lucchesi, one of the league leaders in starts last year, lefty in Cal Quantrill. Maybe he could get his first full year in an MLB starting rotation. So, for the most part, their rotation looks decent. Paddock could be good. I think they have a lot of young pitching prospects that could potentially get called up this year, that could be ready to go. Again, if they could have a good long-term starting pitching rotation in addition to the potential offense they have down the road as well. I think the Padres are really building up in a short season. They have an opportunity to really surprise people, and maybe they could, and potentially make a run at the wild card. I think they can do it. I don't think this year is their year. That's why I have them in 3rd place. I don't think they're going to make it to the playoffs this year. But in terms of next year, that could be another story. But I think this year will be nice. Let's say they can win 30 games. Be a 500 team. Maybe 30, maybe between 30 and 35 games. And if they miss the playoffs, then they miss the playoffs. They make it, somehow make it with 35 wins, which that should be enough this year, and they make it to the playoffs. That would be a huge step forward for this organization. They have not made it to the playoffs since 2006. At closer, Kirby Yates, 15 strikeouts per 9, 110 ERA, 41 saves, one of the best closers in baseball last year. They did add Emilio Pagan, who had 20 saves at 2.32 ERA last year with the Rays, so maybe you now have a setup man and a closer. You also added Drew Pomeranz, who's a former starter for the Padres, actually an all-star in 2016. Kind of bounced around as a struggling starter in Boston, and then tried to start last year in San Francisco, moved to the bullpen, ended up becoming a dominant lefty power reliever. Maybe could slide in the rotation if something happened, but right now will be a reliever. Could be even a multiple inning reliever. So now all of a sudden, in an ideal situation, what you might want to happen is, let's say if it's not a Chris Paddock start, maybe you can have 5 good innings out of the starter. Maybe Pomeranz pitches 2 good innings, Pagan pitches in the 8th, potentially Yates in the 9th. Maybe that could be a potential formula for success this year. In addition to their lineup, we'll see, but they could have 3 really good bullpen pieces this year. In addition to, we talked about Zach Davies, seems like a reliable starter. Maybe Garrett Richards gets going, and maybe Cal Quantrill steps up, who was a first-round pick in 2016. He steps up in addition to Chris Paddock picking right off where that's all. Maybe things do come all together for this Padres team this year. And yeah, Tommy Pham, 2020 season last year with the Rays, has playoff experience. There's the Rays, that was kind of a surprising trade. You have Trent Grisham, who is 23, playing in his first full season, was on the Brewers last year, took the place of Christian Yelich. It did not end well for Grisham or the Brewers. Will always be known, potentially at least a footnote in his career, of making that critical error which led to that wild card game. They had Manny Machado with 30 home runs once again, but his average are down. You think about Machado, what if he gets off to a blazing start? He could be an MVP candidate as well. Fernando Tatis could potentially win the MVP. It's 21, hit 318, 22 home runs, 53 RBIs, 16 stolen bases. That was in 84 games. Translating that a full year, that's 318, 40, 45 home runs, 100 plus RBIs, 30-30 potentially. How good could Tatis go this year? We'll get to see that sample again. Next year, by the time you play 84 and 60 games, that's kind of a full season sample. Next year, for Tatis, that'll be a full year. And who knows with the Padres, even if they miss the playoffs, they could have a good offseason. Maybe things develop. Maybe teams get better. Maybe next year's a year that they really, officially really take off. And I'm wondering, is this a year the Padres break out again? I talked about it. Rotation, I don't think is quite good enough to win. Certainly doesn't look like an October rotation based on what I see right now. A rotation I want in October. How does the bullpen do? Since again, like with the Nationals in October, I mean, can you have a good bullpen other than three good bullpen pieces? And then having, say, someone saying the lineup, 2020 Tommy Pham, Power, Manny Machado, Tatis really breaking out potentially to become one of the best players in this game. We could see that. I could see that in a short sprint, but I just don't think this year's the year. I think they make a lot of signs and progress. I really think 2021 is their official year, but then again, we are talking about everything on paper, on kind of how a full season would work out. And 162, you kind of see where everybody is. I mean, you see the teams that win 90, 100, between 95 and 100 games. Those are usually the best teams, World Series teams. And you see teams that win usually 85 to 90 games. Most of those teams make it to the playoffs who win around 90 games. Then you have the teams that had some good stretches but are not good enough. Maybe they win 85 games somewhere along there. And then you have the teams that win maybe around 80 games. So you kind of see a full season of how things work out, of how good you really are. This year we'll not get to see that. It's kind of somewhat of an unfair season, and it's a short season as well. Okay, so next up, by the way, the team that I do not think has any shot at making the playoffs in this division is the Giants. I think they're more of a team to watch out for maybe in 2022, for that matter, 23. I think it's going to be a while before we see the Giants as a good team again. Okay, so the Rockies last year, they were one of the most disappointing teams in baseball. They took a big step back last year. They lost 91 games, and last year they got off to a terrible start. They were 3-12. It looked like they turned it around. It looked like they were in the wild card hunt, kind of in the middle of the year, and then they just cooled off, lost 91 games, and just a really big drop off for this team, who in 2018, I talked about with the Dodgers earlier in this episode already, talking NL West baseball. They took the Dodgers to a tiebreaker game on October 1st. They were tied. They almost won the West in 2018. At times, I thought they could be that team that could win the West in 2018. I mean, it was such a close race. I mean, it was just an incredible race that went all the way down to the end. I mean, there was a time in that Western Division where there was a three-way tie. I remember at one point in that season, there was a three-way tie. It was on September 2nd for maybe a few hours. So this was a very close West race in 2018. The Rockies, who last year we thought could potentially maybe be that team to catch the Rockies, especially after the D-backs subtracted. That's what we thought the Rockies were. I mean, sure, they didn't win a playoff game, but I thought 2018 and 17-18 were really stepping stones for this franchise going in the right direction. And look at the rotation. In 2018, the 2018 playoffs, you had German Marquez, who in 2018 looked like one of the most dominant starters in baseball in that second half. I thought would take that big step forward. You had John Gray as well, who at times has been quite good in his career. Was drafted to be an ace, has never really quite lived up to that. Kyle Freeland was a Cy Young finalist that year, really had a good year. Looked like he could pitch in Coors Field, and you thought, you have that team, you have a good rotation, you have a good lineup. This is a team, and even to look like a decent bullpen, you thought this is a team that can win, that can potentially win the West. Since the Dodgers, we weren't sure what they were. They won only 90 games the year before that. Or 91, barely were better than the Rockies regular season. Well, the difference was the Dodgers, they had a home playoff game. They had 2 days of rest. They had everything going. I think that's why they won the division series. I think that's why they won the pennant and went to the World Series. Well, for the Rockies, the difference was they had to go into the wild card game and play the Cubs. They had to, I think that was a 12-inning classic. It was a great extra inning thriller where they had to basically use all the bullpen that they had. They had to burn through starting pitchers, and then by the time they got to the division series, they didn't really have their best starting pitchers to line up against the Brewers, and it was really too late at that point, and they ended up getting swept by the Brewers. So maybe that was the difference between having a home playoff series at home and then going on the road for a wild card game. But really what happened is the rotation was terrible last year. Marquez took a big step back. John Gray was the only one who had his ERA was right around 4, only a little below 4. Kyle Freeland, his ERA was almost 7, had a disastrous year. And Antonio Senzatella, at times he thought could be a major league starter, was young, only 24, had an ERA well in the 6s. Jeff Hoffman, whose team invested a lot in as a prospect, had an ERA well above 6. Peter Lambert was only 22, his ERA was over 7. So again, that rotation, well, maybe it has good long-term potential. Now you start to question that. And if this is your rotation in the future, and you have to figure out your rotation and bullpen all over again, and do the Rockies potentially get back into that cycle of great offense but terrible pitching, or that's why they're historically have not been a good team, and that is why they've not had long-term success. I don't think they've ever won the West. I think they were I think the only time they made it to the playoffs, they were a wild card each time. And sure, they made it to the playoffs 4 times in the last 13 years, including winning a pennant. But they just haven't been able to have long-term success. They've never had a great starting pitcher for a long period of time. And the way the pitching was, it was terrible last year. They need a reset. And I think the pitching is going to be bad again this year. I think there's 2 things. If they get the pitching figured out, and it doesn't matter. Sure, they can be a great hitting team. They've always been one of the best hitting teams in baseball. There's 2 ways you can look at. A, they can get the pitching figured out. And maybe Marquez, Gray, Freeland turns out to be a really good combination, and you have a pretty good starting rotation, and then the lineup hits. Maybe they jump out of the gates and potentially surprise people who are in the NL West race, and maybe they can claim a wild card spot. That's probably the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is the pitching's terrible, and they never really figured it out, and they could be one of the worst teams in baseball this year. I mean, I could see that. I think there's just 2 ways. It's all really about the pitching. If the Rockies want to win, they need to have good pitching, or at least decent pitching. So in terms of the lineup, they do have a great lineup again. Ian Desmond, by the way, has opted out, and for great reason. Really, every player's reason to opt out is a great reason. So Trevor Story is a fascinating player. He hit 35 home runs once again, was one of the National League leaders in almost 40 in 2018. Stole 23 bases last year. Is really fast. Is starting to emerge as one of the better offensive shortstops in baseball. But could be due for a big extension like Arenado and like Charlie Blackmon. Charlie Blackmon got a contract that was a little over $100 million, while Nolan Arenado, I think, was something like an 8-year, $260 million contract, one of the largest in MLB history, salary-wise, and per season and in total. Story could be looking at something like that. Again, next year has one last full season before he's a free agent. The question is, does he stay or go? That's an interesting question. That'll be something to talk about a lot. Say over the next year, that could be interesting to monitor. And even if Story does not play very well this year, has really a full season to kind of put it back together, especially given the track record of 2018 and 2019. Arenado, sure, last year hit 40-plus home runs. Again, drove in over 100 RBIs. He has been a 300 hitter, won his 7th Gold Glove. Arenado, another spectacular year, and there was talks of him not being happy with the Rockies organization and potentially maybe trade rumors starting in spring training. Here's the thing with Arenado, and this is his leverage he has. They have this season and next season to show that last year was not a fluke. He can opt out of his contract at their next season. And that could happen if the Rockies continue to lose games. Like I said, this year, worst case scenario, this happens again. They're one of the worst teams in baseball. So what? You get a great draft pick. That doesn't matter. It's not like it'll change your franchise that quickly. It'll take time. So now the question is, do the Rockies have to go through another rebuild of what they went through? I mean, for the most part, in 2009 they got a wild card spot. In 2010 they're in the playoff hunt for much of the year until they really collapsed down the stretch, and then really through that from like 2011 to 2016, at times they're one of the worst teams in baseball. They're never really that competitive. They just couldn't pitch. It seemed like they started to establish a starting pitching foundation starting really in 2017 and 18. It seemed like they built something. So now the question is, can they continue to build something? Was last year kind of typical Rockies where they get good and they can never stay good? Or was last year a fluke? And that's the interesting thing about that, since Freeland was almost could have won the Cy Young. I mean, was a Cy Young finalist, really emerged that year. And Marquez just took off. I mean, they were pitching They almost won the West, and then what happened last year? That's the question. If this can happen, Arenado could be gone, and 2 years from now, Arenado could be on a different team. I really think that could happen, and could really decide to opt out or even ask for a trade if these things continue. Charlie Blackmon is coming off COVID-19. Could take a while again, like with a lot of athletes. I don't think you're in full physical peak athletic condition. I feel like that virus takes a lot out of you already. I think it takes a while to come back from. So maybe Blackmon, it takes a month to get going. And then another interesting factor, I think this will be another long-term piece for the Rockies at 24 home runs. Ryan McMahon and 83 RBIs in his first full season in Colorado. I think he will benefit by playing in Coors Field over the next 4 or 5 years. So that could be another big piece for him. So again, talking about Story, Arenado, potentially Blackmon if he can get back and healthy. And then now McMahon, sure, maybe you have some really good pieces to your lineup, and then maybe have a good rotation. Rockies, completely uncertain. I don't know. I want to watch the games and see how they're doing. But if they're like 3-12, like they were last year, the chances of making the playoffs, forget about it. They're not going to make it to the playoffs. But if they can, say, get on, but they need to start fast, like with pretty much any team if you want to make it to the playoffs, you can't really afford to mess around. It's either getting off to a hot start or it's not, and that's just an interesting storyline around the Rockies. So again, Dodgers are going to win the West. I think the D-backs are kind of right on that borderline between a wild card or not. The Padres could break out this year and claim a wild card spot. The Rockies, if things go right, 2018, maybe the Dodgers not quite as good as we thought. Maybe the Dodgers a little bit down. The Rockies are there. Could we have a repeat of 2018? I mean, I don't know, and I think pretty quickly, I think we'll start to see within a few weeks whether the Rockies are closer to 2017-18 levels or whether they're closer to 2019 levels. We will see. That is the West. I have just one more video left, and that will be the AL West, and then I'll be done with kind of the team by team previews, and then I'll do a quick rapid fire in the next video after that about kind of playoff predictions, what's going to happen, and full season predictions. And by the way, I do not talk about teams I think have no shot at the playoffs. They're kind of more, maybe they have good farm systems and are maybe more intact for maybe 2 or 3 years down the road. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.